6:42 in the morning. His surgeon's badge hit the security desk, not thrown, placed, deliberately. The way a man places something down when he's tired of being asked to prove he exists. Dr. Caleb Oduya had been a cardiothoracic surgeon for 19 years. He had performed over 2,000 open-heart surgeries. He had trained residents at Johns Hopkins, consulted at Mayo Clinic, and once kept a 12-year-old girl alive for 6 hours on a bypass machine while a blizzard shut down half of Philadelphia. He did not raise his voice. He did not make scenes. He did not, as a rule, place his badge on security desks at 6:42 in the morning. But that morning was different. That morning, a man named Douglas Hecht had decided that Caleb did not belong. It started the way these things always start, quietly, almost politely, with just enough plausible deniability to make you wonder if you imagined it. Caleb had arrived at Mercy General Medical Center in Atlanta at 6:38 a.m. He was scheduled for a 7:15 bypass surgery. His patient, a 63-year-old retired schoolteacher named Alvin, had been prepped since 5. The anesthesiology team was already in OR 4. Everything was on schedule. Caleb walked through the main entrance in his street clothes, dark slacks, a charcoal sweater, his hospital badge clipped to his lapel. The same way he had walked through that entrance for 11 years. He nodded to the woman at the front desk. She nodded back. He turned toward the elevator bank that led to the surgical suites. That was when Douglas Hecht stepped in front of him. Hecht was the new head of hospital security. 6 weeks on the job. Former county sheriff's deputy. The kind of man who stood with his chest slightly forward and his chin slightly up, even when there was no reason to. He was holding a coffee cup in one hand and a radio in the other, and he looked at Caleb the way some people look at a puzzle they've already decided they don't like the answer to. "Excuse me, sir." The word sir landed like a question. "This elevator is restricted access, staff and credentialed personnel only." Caleb stopped. He looked at the elevator. He looked at Hecht. He looked down at the badge on his lapel, the badge with his photograph, his name, his department, his access level, all of it. And then he looked back at Hecht. "I'm aware," he said. "I'm Dr. Oduya, cardiothoracic surgery." Hecht looked at the badge. He looked at Caleb. He looked at the badge again. The way someone looks at a word they're convinced is spelled wrong even though it isn't. "I'm going to need you to check in at the front desk first." Caleb had heard those words before. Not here, not at Mercy General, where he had privileges and a parking space and a plaque on the wall of the cardiac unit. But he had heard them, the polite obstruction, the reasonable-sounding bureaucratic speed bump that was, underneath, not reasonable at all. "I check in at the surgical suite," he said evenly. "That's the procedure for attending surgeons. I have a patient in pre-op right now, new policy." Hecht said it like he was reading from a pamphlet. "All non-administrative personnel enter through the front desk between 6 and 8 a.m. security directive." Caleb looked around. A nurse in scrubs walked past them and stepped directly onto the elevator without stopping. Hecht did not move, did not say a word to her. Caleb watched the elevator doors close. "That nurse just used the elevator," he said. "She's staff. I'm staff. I need to verify that." Something shifted in Caleb's chest. Not anger, not yet. More like the slow, exhausted recognition of a pattern. He had been a surgeon since he was 31 years old. He had gray in his beard now. He had a daughter in college and a mortgage in Buckhead and a waiting room full of former patients who sent him Christmas cards every year. He had also been stopped in parking garages, questioned in hospital lobbies, and once asked by a hotel concierge if he was sure he had a reservation, all for the same reason Douglas Hecht was standing in front of him now. He unclipped his badge and held it out. Hecht did not take it. He looked at it, then looked at Caleb, then looked past him toward the front desk. "I'll need you to come with me and sign in. I don't have time to sign in. My patient goes to table in 32 minutes. That's not my concern." Those 4 words. That's not my concern. Caleb set his badge on the security desk. Not thrown, placed. Then he took out his phone and called the chief of surgery. Dr. Harriet Mosgrove picked up on the second ring. She had been chief for 6 years. She was 61 years old, white, from rural Georgia, and she had recruited Caleb herself after seeing him present at a cardiology conference in Boston. She was not a patient woman at 7 in the morning. "Caleb, you're not in pre-op." "I'm aware. I'm being held at the elevator bank by security." A pause. "Held Doug Hecht is asking me to sign in at the front desk before I can access the surgical floor." Another pause. Longer. "Put him on." Caleb held the phone toward Hecht. "Chief of surgery." Hecht looked at the phone the way he'd looked at the badge. Like the information on it might be wrong. He took it. What Harriet said to him, Caleb would not fully learn until later. What he saw was Hecht's chest go from slightly forward to completely still. He saw the coffee cup lower. He saw something move across the man's face. Not quite shame, not quite surprise, but somewhere in the unhappy neighborhood between them. Hecht handed the phone back. He did not look at Caleb. He stepped aside. Caleb picked up his badge. He stepped onto the elevator. He had 29 minutes. He made it in 22. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 40 minutes. Alvin's left anterior descending artery had been 94% occluded. Without intervention, his cardiologist had told him he was looking at a major cardiac event within weeks. Caleb grafted a vessel from the leg, rerouted the blood supply, and closed. Alvin's heart, beating on its own by 11:53 a.m., was unimpressed by whatever had happened at the elevator bank. It simply resumed its work, the way hearts do. Caleb scrubbed out and walked to his office and sat down and did not move for 4 minutes. He was not trembling. He was not crying. He was doing something quieter and more consuming than either of those things. He was deciding. In 19 years, he had let things go. He had let them go because fighting cost time, and time was what his patients needed. He had let them go because the fight rarely went anywhere. He had let them go because he told himself it was not worth it, even when some part of him knew that was not the right word. The right word was exhausting. The right word was relentless. The right word was that he was 53 years old and tired in a way that had nothing to do with the 4-hour surgery he'd just completed. He pulled out a sheet of paper, not his phone, paper, and he wrote down exactly what had happened at 6:38 that morning, in the precise, unadorned language of a man who had spent decades documenting things that mattered. He submitted it to hospital administration before noon. What he did not know yet was that he was not the first. The administrative assistant who processed his report, a woman named Tanya, who had worked at Mercy General for 14 years, read the incident description and went very still at her desk. Then she opened a folder in her filing system she had not opened in 3 months. Inside it were 2 other incident reports, both from the surgical floor, both involving elevator access, both from the same 6-week periods since Hecht had taken the security director role. One was from a black radiology resident. One was from a Filipino hospitalist. Neither report had been formally reviewed. They had been filed and tagged pending and left there. Tanya forwarded all 3 to the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Raymond Goss, with a single line of subject text. Pattern of access denial. Surgical staff. Recommend immediate review. Goss called Harriet within the hour. Harriet called the Director of Human Resources. The Director of Human Resources called Legal. Legal pulled the security camera footage from the elevator bank that morning. The footage showed 17 staff members using that elevator between 6:30 and 7 a.m. 14 of them walked past the security desk without stopping. Hecht said nothing to 13 of them. The one he stopped, the one he followed 3 steps toward the elevator before speaking, was Caleb. The footage also showed something else. It showed the nurse Caleb had pointed out to Hecht. It showed her walking past. It showed Hecht watching her go. It showed him turning back to Caleb. Nobody issued a statement that week. Investigations don't work that way, and anyone who has ever been on the wrong end of institutional inertia knows that the process moves at its own pace, regardless of how clear the evidence is. But things began to move, quietly, with the particular momentum that builds when paper trails align. What emerged over the following 3 weeks was not a story about one bad morning at an elevator. It was a story about a system. In his 6 weeks as security director, Douglas Hecht had filed 14 access challenge reports, the internal term for stopping someone and requesting verification. Of those 14, 11 involved employees who were people of color. Of those 11, 9 were physicians or residents with full surgical or clinical access. Not one of the 14 resulted in an actual security violation. Not one of the stopped employees had been in the wrong place or doing anything improper. They had all been, in every verifiable sense, exactly where they were supposed to be. Hecht had also, it turned out, done something similar at his previous position, a regional hospital in Savannah where he'd worked for 8 months before being reassigned to a different facility. The reassignment had been quiet. His personnel file described it as a voluntary transfer for professional development. The incidents that preceded it were documented but not flagged. No one at Mercy General had known to ask about them. Caleb learned all of this gradually, in pieces, the way you learn things when institutions move slowly and lawyers speak carefully. His attorney, a woman named Gwendolyn Ash, who had handled discrimination cases in Atlanta for 20 years, and who did not use many words, but chose the ones she used with great precision, walked him through each development with the same tone she might use to explain a chess position. Methodical, patient, watching several moves ahead. There was a moment, about 2 weeks into the process, when Caleb was sitting in Gwendolyn's conference room, looking at the printed security camera, still spread across the table, and he felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not vindication, something more complicated and more tired than both of those. He thought about the radiology resident in the other report. Young woman, 3rd year, had been at the hospital for 6 months. Had filed her report and, when nothing happened in 2 weeks, had quietly stopped mentioning it. He thought about the hospitalist. Middle-aged man had been at Mercy General for 3 years, had filed his report and then, according to Tanya, had come back to ask about it once and been told it was under review. Under review. Filed and pending. The bureaucratic equivalent of a drawer that stays closed. He thought about how many drawers were closed, in how many buildings, in how many cities. He thought about the residents and the hospitalists and the nurses and the technicians and the dozens of people who had let things go, not because they weren't worth fighting for, but because fighting is expensive and exhausting, and the outcome is never guaranteed, and some days you just need to get to your patient on time. He thought about Alvin, whose heart was beating steadily in a recovery room on the 4th floor. Hecht was placed on administrative leave pending investigation 2 weeks after Caleb filed his report. The investigation, conducted by an external HR firm, took 6 weeks. Its findings were not made public in full, but the outcome was. Douglas Hecht's employment at Mercy General Medical Center was terminated. He did not resign. He was fired. The distinction mattered to Caleb, though he couldn't fully explain why. The hospital also announced without fanfare a review of its security protocols and an independent audit of access challenge incidents over the prior 18 months. It did not issue a formal apology. Attorneys rarely let institutions issue formal apologies. But the CMO did send a letter to each of the 3 physicians who had filed reports. The letter used words like concern and commitment and values. Caleb read it twice and put it in a file. What the letter did not say, and what no letter could say, was the thing that mattered most. It could not give back the morning. It could not uncreate the moment when Caleb placed his badge on that desk and stood there in a hallway of a hospital where he had worked for 11 years and waited to be believed. It could not explain to his daughter, who called him that evening and heard something in his voice and asked what was wrong, why that moment had cost him something that didn't have a clear name. He tried to explain it to her anyway. He said, "It's not that it surprised me." She said, "I know, Dad." He said, "That's the part that bothers me most, that it didn't surprise me." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yeah, I know." He went back to the hospital the next morning, and the morning after that. He walked through the main entrance, nodded to the woman at the front desk, and took the elevator to the surgical floor without stopping. Alvin was discharged 12 days post-op, shook Caleb's hand in the hallway, and told him he'd already signed up for a cardiac rehab program at the Y. Caleb told him that was exactly right. Alvin said he planned to be around for at least another 20 years. Caleb told him to hold him to that. He still takes the stairs some mornings. Not because anything stops him, just because it's quieter, and because some habits form in moments you didn't choose, and they stay with you longer than the moments themselves. Douglas Hecht was never rehired in a healthcare security role. The radiology resident finished her residency and matched into a fellowship at UCSF. The hospitalist is still at Mercy General. He walks past the elevator bank every morning. Sometimes he looks at it. Sometimes he doesn't. And somewhere in Atlanta, in an OR with good lighting and a team he trusts, Caleb Oduya is probably in the middle of a surgery right now. Hands steady, mind clear, doing the thing he has always done. The thing no security desk and no access challenge, and no man with a radio and a coffee cup was ever going to take from him. The badge is still clipped to his lapel. It was always there. The question was never whether it belonged. The question was who got to decide that, and whether anyone was ever going to make that decision cost something. This time, it did.